Addiction is the most creative way your mind found to keep you from facing certain truths. And it doesn't just show up in alcohol or cigarettes. It hides in big and small habits. Using drugs to escape a pain you don't want to feel, rewatching the same episode for the fourth time just to avoid thinking, gaming for hours just so you don't have to deal with the silence. This isn't laziness, it's not lack of discipline. It's your shadow demanding the spotlight. Carl Jung said there's a forgotten key. While everyone else insists on more willpower, he believed the real way out was to look straight at what you've been trying to hide. Because if you don't, you'll stay stuck in the same loop. Urge, relief, shame, repeat. It's like spraying strong perfume in a moldy room. You mask the smell, but the dampness keeps spreading behind the walls. In this video, I'm going to show you what Jung discovered about addiction, and why freedom only comes when you learn to decode the hidden message inside the urge. This isn't just about substances, it's about anything you use to numb yourself. Could be drugs to escape memories, food after a fight, the compulsion to check social media in the middle of work, or even stuffing your calendar just so you don't have to feel the emptiness. And here's the truth nobody likes to hear. You're not weak, you're not broken. There's a psychological, even spiritual reason why you keep getting trapped in this pattern. Addiction is like an alarm that never stops ringing. You can try to muffle the sound, but it'll only stop once you find out where the smoke is coming from. Stick with me until the end, and you'll see how to turn every urge that feels like a curse into a tool for growth. Because what once looked like poison really can become alchemy, but only if you've got the courage to face what you've been running from. Have you ever noticed that the promise to quit usually doesn't come from a real desire to change, but from the shame of failing yet again? It's like that student who swears he'll study every day after flunking a test. The promise doesn't come from clarity, it comes from the sting of the mistake. And when guilt is what fuels motivation, the cycle just keeps spinning. Addiction feeds on that. The harder you try to silence the shadow, the louder it screams inside you. The drama isn't just in the act of falling, but in feeling like you're being watched by your own judgment. It's as if an invisible audience were waiting for you to mess up, and that audience is you. You punish yourself, mock yourself, call yourself weak. I've met people who, after relapsing, would clean their whole house obsessively, as if scrubbing the floor could wash away the guilt. But the dirt never disappears, because it's not outside, it's inside. Discipline on its own is a house of cards. You hold it together for a while, but one puff of stress and it all collapses. It's the guy who promises not to drink anymore and manages to stay dry all week, but come Friday night with friends, the craving blows up. Or the person who swaps cigarettes for gum, but when anxiety kicks in, chews through 10 packs in one go. It's not a lack of discipline. Addiction isn't just a habit, it's emotion left undigested. And then comes the weight of loneliness. A strange kind of loneliness, because sometimes you're surrounded by people, but nobody sees the war inside. It's like being at a party with blasting music, but deep down, all you hear is silence. A friend once told me that even with family around, his battle with pornography felt like a dirty secret he could never share. That kind of loneliness eats away at you, making you believe no one could ever understand your pain. At the core, addiction usually hides unresolved wounds. Maybe it's the bullying you went through and never spoke about, the career that didn't turn out the way you dreamed, or the lack of affection you learned to cover up with cheap thrills. It's like painting over a crack in the wall. From afar it looks brand new, but the structure is still damaged. Every relapse is basically saying, I don't want to feel this right now. But your body and mind come back to collect the bill later. Over time, you start believing you're just a walking defect. Not a human being fighting, but a certified failure. That belief eats away at your identity until you no longer see yourself as someone carrying an addiction, but simply as the addict. And yet, it's exactly at that point that a crack of light can sneak in. Because if your identity was built on pain and escape, maybe it can be rebuilt on something way more solid than empty promises. What if addiction was like that annoying notification on your phone? You try to ignore it, mute it, even delete the app, But the discomfort doesn't go away because it was never about the alert, it was about the unread message. That's what the impulse is, a notification from your shadow. And what if, instead of trying to erase it, you opened it to see what's really written inside? That's when the whole battle against yourself starts to lose its meaning. Look at simple situations. Someone who always needs a drink before socializing might not be thirsty for alcohol, but terrified of rejection. Or the person who dives into online shopping at the end of the month isn't really chasing products. They're chasing relief from financial anxiety. I knew a guy who could only fall asleep by watching random videos until dawn. He eventually realized it wasn't insomnia. It was the fear of facing the silence of an empty home. The addiction was pointing to his loneliness, not just stealing his sleep. This is the most overlooked part of freedom. You don't break free just by stopping the behavior. You break free when you finally understand what it was hiding. It's like when your car makes a weird noise. You can blast the radio to cover it up, but the problem's still in the engine. Only when you pop the hood do you see the root. Addiction works the same way. Covering your ears won't fix it. You need the guts to open the hood of your soul. And that's where self-knowledge kicks in. It's not some abstract concept, it's practical stuff. When you decide not to grab your phone every single time boredom hits, you start discovering what you actually enjoy. Maybe it's reading, cooking, writing, or just walking in silence. Slowly, you realize you don't need the impulse to feel alive. The question shifts from, how do I stop? To, who am I when I'm not running away? This process also brings self-acceptance. You stop seeing yourself as defective and start seeing yourself as someone in training. A friend of mine once said, "When I finally understood that my relapse was my body asking for help, not a death sentence, everything changed." Courage isn't about never falling. It's about learning from every fall. That shift is what separates the ones who stay trapped from the ones who find strength in their own path. And at the end of the day, that's what real control looks like. Not a rigid blockade, but a conscious choice. You realize you can feel the urge without being enslaved by it. The pain that once crushed you begins to transform into purpose. Whether it's helping others, creating something new, or just living lighter. If this path made sense to you, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me which country you're watching from. It's powerful to see this transformation happening all over the world at the same time. Have you ever noticed how the cycle of addiction always plays out the same way? First comes the urge, that silent call that feels almost irresistible. You give in and feel an instant relief, like you finally found peace for a few seconds. But right after comes the shame, that voice whispering, "You failed again," and then the repetition. The emptiness creeps back in, pulling the urge with it. It's like running in circles inside a maze where every exit leads you right back to the start. This cycle is tricky because it feels logical to fight the urge, but that's exactly what feeds the shadow. Jung said that whatever you repress grows stronger. It's like trying to hold a ball underwater. The harder you push it down, the more pressure builds until it bursts out violently. The urge doesn't vanish just because you hit it. It comes back with even more force precisely because you refuse to face it. Think of it this way. Ignoring addiction is like patching a leak with duct tape. It might hold for a few hours, but the pressure underneath keeps building until the wall bursts. I once knew someone who'd spend days trying to stay strong, but one tough night was enough to send him spiraling twice as hard. That's the thing. The problem isn't just the act itself. It's the repression mechanism that turns small impulses into tidal waves. What's interesting is that this cycle shows up in other areas of life too. Whenever you repress an emotion, anger, sadness, fear, it always finds a way out. Sometimes through an explosive argument, other times through physical symptoms like insomnia or stomach pain. Addiction is just the loudest version of that process. It brutally exposes what happens when you suffocate something that needed to be acknowledged and integrated. That's why the solution isn't fighting harder. It's learning to observe. When you start seeing the urge as just a messenger, the whole game changes. Instead of wasting energy repressing it, You start asking, what is this craving trying to tell me right now? That simple shift already takes power away from the shadow, because what's seen in the light can't manipulate you from the dark. And at its core, this is about embracing curiosity, looking at the cycle not with fear, but with genuine interest, like a scientist observing a phenomenon instead of running from it. The more you notice the patterns, the less they control you. And that's exactly where the next question begins to rise. If you stopped repressing and started truly listening, what would your shadow reveal about who you really are? When people talk about addiction, the message is almost always the same. Just use willpower, add discipline to your routine, cut out the triggers. But if you really think about it, that's like telling someone who's drowning to just swim harder. Have you ever tried swimming while exhausted, panicked, and gasping for air? The problem isn't strength, it's breath. Addiction works the same way. The issue isn't fighting harder, it's figuring out why you're drowning in the first place. The common view treats addiction as an enemy to be defeated, but Jung saw it as a secret code from the unconscious. The symptom is just the tip of the iceberg. What you avoid looking at often holds the key to healing. It's like an email that lands in your spam folder. You ignore it, but inside could be the most important message you'll ever get. Addiction is that annoying email that keeps showing up. And the more you delete it without reading, the more it returns. Want a real example? Think of someone who swears they'll never touch their phone before bed again. For a few days, it works. But the anxiety doesn't disappear. It shows up in the stomach, in restless hands, in the inability to relax. Soon enough, they pick up the phone again, just for 5 minutes. The problem was never the screen itself, but the silence they couldn't face. Cutting the trigger works for a few hours, but it doesn't heal the wound. I once knew someone who completely cut out alcohol. Pride, discipline, self-control. But when stress hit, the escape showed up in overeating, online gaming, or compulsive shopping. The pattern didn't vanish, it just changed clothes. That's the trap. When you don't understand the message, the symptom reinvents itself. Closing the doors doesn't help if the windows are still wide open. That's why relying only on discipline is like trying to hold down a compressed spring with your bare hands. You can manage for a while, but the pressure keeps building until it snaps back harder. The urge doesn't need punishment, it needs to be heard. What you avoid looking at is exactly what needs to be faced. The shadow, once seen, loses its power to rule in the dark. But as long as you ignore it, it runs the show like an invisible king. So here's the real challenge. If discipline has failed you so many times, maybe it's time to stop forcing the spring down and start asking why it's there in the first place. What if healing isn't about cutting triggers, but about opening the envelope you've been too afraid to read? Maybe the answer has been sitting in the very place you've been running from all along. Have you noticed how the urge shows up at the most random times, almost like an automatic shortcut? Sometimes it's not even during a crisis. It's when you're bored, waiting for an elevator, or scrolling aimlessly online. The first step isn't to fight it, but to watch it. When the craving hits, try pausing and asking yourself, what am I really looking for here? Company? Rest? A little anesthesia for this restlessness. That curiosity alone already breaks the spell. And here's the funny thing, what you're after often isn't what it looks like. Addiction can wear the mask of food, but deep down what you wanted was affection. Can show up as endless scrolling on social media, but what hurt was the lack of purpose. I've met people who only realized this once they started observing instead of blaming themselves. The urge didn't ask for punishment, it asked for translation. And once you learn to translate, the emptiness stops being so terrifying. The second step is to name what you feel. Sounds simple, but it works like magic. When you say, this is frustration, this is exhaustion, this is fear of being alone, you pull the shadow out of anonymity. I like to compare it to those movies where the mysterious villain is scarier than the revealed one. In the dark, every sound feels like a deadly threat. With the light on, you realize it was just the door creaking. A powerful practice is to jot down quickly, on your phone notes or a scrap of paper, the emotion that comes with the urge. For example, craving a drink, feeling of unfairness after the meeting. Once you name it, you realize it wasn't thirst at all. It was anger you hadn't processed. I've seen people who, just by recording these patterns, started reducing relapses naturally because they finally saw what was really hiding behind the craving. And the third step is to recognize this isn't weakness. Addiction is disguised pain, not a factory defect. Once you get that, the way you relate to yourself shifts. Instead of labeling yourself incapable, you start treating yourself as someone in the middle of healing. I always say, nobody blames themselves for coughing when they have the flu, because they know it's a symptom. Same thing here, the urge doesn't define you, it signals something that needs care. That's when everything starts to change color. You realize every urge can be seen as a note from your own mind, asking for attention. And what if instead of tearing up the note, you actually read it, line by line? The answer might not come right away, but clarity does. And that's where the next big question comes in. How do you turn this curious way of looking into a daily practice that actually transforms your life? Accepting the shadow is the step that separates endless struggle from real transformation. As long as you keep trying to hide the parts of yourself you don't like, they'll keep running your life from behind the scenes. Integration means admitting, yeah, that's a part of me too. Not to give in to addiction, but to stop wasting energy denying it exists. When you embrace it, the shadow loses its power to manipulate you in the dark. In practice, this means replacing the automatic ritual with a conscious one. The urge shows up, take a deep breath, walk for 10 minutes, jot down 3 lines about what you're feeling. Small gestures that seem simple create space between you and the old pattern. It's like switching from autopilot to manual steering. You're not denying the urge, you're transforming the way you respond to it. This process changes how you relate to addiction. It stops being an enemy and becomes a teacher. Every urge turns into a reminder to look inward. Instead of shame, you start to see the craving as a bell ringing. Pay attention. Something inside you needs to be seen. I've known people who turned their compulsions into powerful journals, where each note revealed a forgotten piece of their own story. That's exactly where the metaphor of alchemy comes in. What once looked like poison can become medicine. The energy that used to drag you down can be redirected into building something greater. How many artists, writers, and leaders have turned their deepest wounds into works that move the world? Not because they erased the shadow, but because they learned to use it as raw material for growth. And don't think this is something distant or reserved for the enlightened. You can start with small steps. Swap the evening beer for a walk with music in your ears. Replace the urge to open social media with writing 3 sentences in a notebook about how you feel. Every conscious swap is like training a new muscle. And the more you practice, the stronger this new response becomes. At the core, this is the true alchemy of life. Turning what once looked like weakness into strength, and what once felt like a prison into a call to freedom. Addiction, once seen as poison, can become the very doorway to individuation, the process of becoming who you really are. And then the inevitable question arises. If every urge is a bell ringing, will you keep ignoring the sound? Or will you finally pick it up and see what's being revealed? Freedom isn't about killing desire, it's about changing your relationship with it. Remember what we talked about earlier? What once looked like poison can be turned into alchemy. When you learn to accept the shadow, to replace the automatic ritual with conscious choices, every urge stops being a threat and starts becoming a reminder of transformation. Addiction stops being the enemy and becomes a guide. It's like every craving is a bell ringing, calling you to look deeper, to integrate the parts of yourself that once stayed hidden. And every small victory, a breath before a relapse, a quick note written instead of giving in to the urge, is a step forward on this journey of becoming whole. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment sharing your biggest struggle and how you're facing it today. Your story might be the spark of hope for someone going through the exact same battle. So hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. And if you want to keep going on this journey with me, stay tuned for the next video popping up on your screen right now.